Welcome to Dark Whispers, a realm where reality blurs, shadows speak, and the coldest truths lie buried beneath silence. Whether you're wrapped in quiet solitude under city lights or listening from the edge of the world, we're grateful you've joined us tonight. Our story begins not with a scream, but a whisper, lost in the white expanse of Antarctica. This is the recovered audio journal of Daniel Kessler, a geophysicist whose final expedition in 2023 ended in mystery, after uncovering something beneath the ice that was never meant to be found. What you're about to hear may alter how you view the most remote reaches of Earth. Listener discretion is advised. Some things should stay buried. Let's begin. March 15th, 2023. My name is Daniel Kessler. If you're hearing this, there's a good chance I'm either dead or have vanished, like the others who learned what we unearthed. I've hidden these recordings for 25 years, but the ice is melting faster now. People deserve to know what lies buried beneath Antarctica before it disappears forever. This isn't the fantasy of conspiracy theorists hiding behind screen names. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I touched it. Since 1998, I've been looking over my shoulder waiting for the day they come to silence me for good. They called it Project E9. Officially, it never existed. September 12th, 1998. Classification eyes only. The call came on a Tuesday. I was in my Arlington apartment, just 3 months into civilian life after spending 22 years charting terrain for the Army Corps of Engineers. The voice was composed, formal, and disturbingly well-versed in details of my classified military record. Mr. Kessler, this is Director Hayes. We have an opening that fits your unique background in cartography and Arctic fieldwork. I should have hung up then. Government jobs don't begin with mystery calls to unlisted numbers, but the payment, $200,000 for 6 weeks, was more than I'd earned in 2 years of military duty. What kind of work? I asked. Satellite mapping adjustments in Antarctica. Some magnetic interference is skewing GPS. Nothing more complicated than that. Nothing complicated. If only I'd known. We arranged a meeting the next day at an anonymous office building in Tyson's Corner. No business names, just Suite 1247. Director Hayes turned out to be a lean man in his 50s, tanned like someone who traveled to places no one talks about. He wore a costly suit but cheap shoes, details you pick up after 2 decades tracking hostile movement. Before we proceed, Mr. Kessler, I need your signature on this non-disclosure agreement. He passed a thick document across a polished wooden table. Standard procedure for high-clearance work. I skimmed it. I shouldn't have. It wasn't standard at all. It gagged me from ever disclosing anything seen, heard, or felt during the operation, under threat of indefinite detention for national security violations. But the money was real, and my savings weren't. It's a simple assignment, Hayes continued. You'll be part of a compact team conducting geomagnetic analysis near the Gamburtsev Mountains. We believe local ore formations may be skewing satellite readings. Your role is to map the anomaly and recommend adjustments for our orbital navigation systems. He showed me satellite images, stretches of endless ice, interrupted only by jagged mountain peaks rising like fossilized fangs. When do we leave? I asked. October 15th. You'll fly to Christchurch, then McMurdo Station, then be helicoptered to our temporary base, Camp Argus. It doesn't appear on any maps, nor will it once you leave. That should have been another red flag. Antarctic operations require international transparency under treaty law. If Argus wasn't recorded, it meant this mission was buried deep by design. But I signed the papers. God help me, I signed. March the 15th, 2023. The flight to Antarctica was my first clue that something was off. Instead of the usual military transport packed with researchers and engineers, we flew aboard an unmarked C-130 Hercules. No identification, no insignia. 13 people, and half of them wouldn't speak to the rest. Dr. Sarah Chen was the team's archaeologist, which immediately raised a red flag. What need would a cartographic mission have for an archaeologist? She looked about 30, with the intense stillness of someone who'd spent years uncovering truths others wanted hidden. When I asked what she was doing on the mission, she just smiled. "Insurance," she said, "in case what we find is older than expected." Colonel Marcus Webb and General Patricia Morrison represented the military element. Webb was Army Intelligence, Morrison, Air Force Strategic Command. Their presence made no sense for GPS recalibration. They mostly kept to themselves, speaking in code over tightly sealed folders. Then there was Dr. James Holbrook, a linguist. That was red flag number 3. Why would someone who specialized in dead languages be needed to analyze rocks and magnetism? The rest of the group consisted of engineers, a medic, and 2 logistics coordinators who moved and watched like special forces. Something felt wrong. But by then, we were already crossing the Ross Ice Shelf. There was no turning back. McMurdo Station looked as expected. Prefabricated shelters and labs scattered like debris across the white expanse. What surprised me was how quickly we were processed and pushed onto helicopters. The final flight lasted 3 hours, gliding over terrain that looked utterly alien, an unbroken wasteland of white, interrupted only by dark gashes and peaks. I've seen cold, Afghanistan's Hindu Kush, northern Canada, but this was something else. Antarctica didn't just resist life, it repelled it. Camp Argus lay in a valley flanked by 2 Gamburtsev peaks, semi-protected from the wind but still frozen beyond comprehension. Temperatures never climbed above minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The facility included 6 modular units linked by insulated corridors and a communications tower far too sophisticated for routine data relays. "Welcome to the end of the world," Colonel Webb said as we arrived. "Out here, don't expect the usual rules or the usual explanations." That evening, while I was calibrating my cartography systems, Dr. Chen knocked softly. "Can I ask you something, Daniel?" Her expression was unusually anxious. "Sure." "During your military career, were you ever sent on a mission where the real objective wasn't revealed until after you'd already committed?" I paused. Once or twice. Usually meant the planners expected casualties. She nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." October 18th, 1998. Classification beyond top secret. By the 3rd day at Camp Argus, we received the first returns from our ground-penetrating radar. I'd expected to see the typical subsurface geology, glacial layers, some ore perhaps. But what we saw instead were structures, geometric configurations that no natural formation could mimic. They resembled city blocks arranged concentrically, spiraling around a central hub. If these were buildings, they were colossal, some stretching over 1,000 feet across. "The radar must be faulty," I told Dr. Chen as we examined the data. "No way there's a city under this much ice. This region has been buried for millions of years." She stared at the screen, transfixed. What if it wasn't buried before the ice? What if it was constructed after? Impossible. Nothing can survive that pressure and cold. "Nothing we know of," she said. She pointed to tunnels connecting the structures, far too symmetrical to be natural. And certain radar reflections were anomalous, as if bouncing off metal. "That's not ice. That's something engineered." Just then, General Morrison entered. "Dr. Chen, Mr. Kessler, Command center now." Inside, the room was buzzing. Banks of computers, frantic technicians, glowing displays. The main screen showed a 3D topography derived from our radar. It looked like a city, but not like anything ever designed by human hands. The layout was alien. Spirals, fractals, impossible geometry that seemed to shift depending on your angle. "This," said Morrison, "is why you're really here. 3 weeks ago, one of our orbital recon satellites detected thermal patterns in this region. Not volcanic activity, structured heat signatures, consistent with artificial systems." Colonel Webb gestured at the screen. "The formations go down nearly 4 miles. Preliminary scans show they're made from stone and metal alloys unknown to us." Dr. Holbrook stepped forward. "Some of the design elements match early Andean math structures, but evolved far beyond Bronze Age capabilities." "We've considered that," Morrison replied. "Now we're drilling down. We want direct access." Silence gripped the room. I finally spoke. "Ma'am, if there's thermal activity and unknown alloys, shouldn't we be using extreme caution? We don't know what this is." Morrison didn't blink. "This site was first spotted in 1947. Operation High Jump. The Soviets found it again in 56. The Chinese have been quietly surveying here since 87. We're not the first to discover it, but we might be the first to open it." That was when I knew I hadn't signed up for mapping. I'd stepped into something vast, secret, and unimaginably dangerous. March the 16th, 2023. Drilling began at first light on October 20th. The equipment they brought in was unlike anything I'd encountered before. Thermal lance systems capable of generating heat intense enough to melt through Antarctic ice, something I thought physically impossible in that environment. The energy requirements for such machinery should have demanded a nuclear reactor, yet the camp's generators were conventional diesel-powered units. I asked one of the technicians, "Where did this come from?" He just shrugged. "Above my pay grade, buddy. I run it when they say run it." The drilling progressed far more rapidly than anticipated. Where it should have taken several weeks to reach the subglacial layers, nearly 2 miles down, we broke through to the first level of structural anomaly in only 4 days. The thermal lances didn't just melt ice. They sliced through it with uncanny efficiency, forming a perfectly uniform shaft, 8 feet in diameter. Dr. Chen, overseeing the operation, suddenly summoned everyone to the command center. Her voice trembled with a mix of exhilaration and unease. "You need to see this." The drill had breached an open void. The cameras mounted near the lance tips revealed a colossal chamber, at least 100 feet in height, with walls formed of the same dense black stone we'd previously detected on radar. But this wasn't unrefined rock. It had been shaped and polished to such a perfect sheen that light didn't reflect from its surface. It seemed to vanish into it. "My God," whispered Dr. Holbrook. "Look at the walls." The chamber was covered in intricate carvings, not crude etchings or basic symbols, but a sophisticated system of mathematical and linguistic code. The patterns shimmered under the camera lights, creating visual distortions, as though the images themselves resisted observation. "These are not human," Dr. Chen said softly. "I've studied ancient scripts from every known civilization. This is something entirely different. The equations alone suggest a level of science we haven't even approached." Meanwhile, General Morrison was on a secure satellite line, speaking with someone whose clearance clearly outranked hers. I only caught fragments. "Confirmed structural stability, unknown material. Recommend full excavation team on standby." But it was Colonel Webb who voiced what we were all beginning to suspect. "We're not the first to set foot here." He motioned toward a darkened corner of the chamber, where equipment, clearly man-made, lay partially buried in frost. The tools were heavily corroded, but still recognizable. Abandoned drills, frayed cables, shattered instruments. Soviet issue, he said. Must be from their 1956 operation. They got further than anyone ever admitted. That night, I didn't sleep. What we'd uncovered shifted everything. If an ancient, technologically advanced civilization had been entombed beneath Antarctica, it meant our understanding of history was fundamentally flawed. But worse was the growing certainty that the global powers had known about this for decades and had chosen to keep it hidden. Later that evening, Dr. Chen returned to my module. This time, she looked genuinely disturbed. "Daniel, I need to show you something, but you have to promise you won't tell Morrison or Webb until I understand what it means." She led me to her workstation and displayed a set of high-resolution images she'd captured of the chamber walls. With enhancement tools, she had isolated specific characters and cross-referenced them with ancient scripts. "These markings," she said, pointing to a spiral sequence, "aren't decorative. They're instructional. Equations, astronomical data, and what I think is a warning." "A warning about what?" I asked. She brought up another processed image. "Based on the math and stellar alignments, I think it's a countdown, a temporal map, predicting when something is going to occur." I hesitated. "When?" Her hand trembled as she revealed her last calculation. "If I'm right, the final point falls in the year 2023, exactly 25 years from now." The next morning, we descended into the chamber. October 25th, 1998. Classification, ultra-classified. Orion-level access. Entry into the chamber required extreme precautions. Arctic-grade climbing harnesses, environmental monitors, and emergency protocols which Colonel Webb personally managed. The vertical shaft our equipment had carved was structurally intact, but due to the unknown properties of the subterranean material, we couldn't predict how the site might react once occupied. I was part of the first entry team, along with Dr. Chen, Dr. Holbrook, and two operatives who finally dropped the pretense of being logistics personnel. They were special forces, sent not just to assist, but to secure anything deemed a national asset. From the ground, the space was even more awe-inspiring. The vaulted ceiling stretched far above us, upheld by pillars that defied architectural logic. The black stone walls warped subtly, distorting perception and disorienting the senses. And everywhere, etched into every visible surface, were those same alien symbols. But what stood at the center of the room eclipsed everything else: a sarcophagus, 8 feet long and 3 feet wide, carved from the same stone but with a transparent lid, crystalline and softly glowing from within. "Jesus Christ," one of the operatives whispered. "There's something inside." Through the crystalline top, we could make out a form. It was humanoid in shape, but the details were wrong, too tall, limbs disproportionately long. The skull elongated beyond any human morphology. It was perfectly preserved, as though entombed yesterday, not millennia ago. Dr. Chen was already documenting everything, her flash creating eerie reflections against the glassy surfaces. "Whatever preservation technique they used," she murmured, "it's beyond anything we've ever achieved. Cellular structure looks completely intact." Dr. Holbrook was captivated by the objects surrounding the sarcophagus. Tablets, devices, instruments, none familiar, none decipherable. "The inscriptions here are far more advanced," he noted. "They're narrative, possibly even instructional." One object stood apart. Not stone, but a crystalline construct that emitted a low, vibrating hum when exposed to light. The moment our flashlight beams swept across its surface, the chamber echoed with a sound, low, melodic, almost mournful. A resonance that felt intelligent. "Lights off!" Dr. Chen cried, but it was too late. The crystal tablet had begun to glow, its light pulsating in rhythm with the chamber's acoustics. And then Dr. Holbrook started screaming. He had been nearest to the tablet when it activated. His eyes rolled back. He spoke, not in English or any known language, but a guttural, complex stream of sounds laced with numbers, equations, and symbols that no human mouth should be capable of forming. "They knew," he suddenly said, his voice now echoing unnaturally. "They knew it would happen again. The thaw, the waters, the awakening. That's why they sealed it away. That's why they left the warnings." Colonel Webb was already calling for immediate extraction, but Holbrook kept speaking. "It's not a countdown to destruction," he said, his voice warping. "It's to emergence. When the ice breaks, when the seals weaken, they'll return, and we will not be ready." Then he collapsed and never regained coherent speech again. The evacuation was chaotic. Dr. Holbrook was unresponsive, whispering in that alien tongue. The crystal tablet glowed brighter with every minute, and more disturbingly, the sarcophagus responded, its lights intensifying, strange sounds emanating from within, mechanical systems humming to life after what had to be centuries of silence. We had only climbed halfway back up the shaft when the seismic alarms began to scream. March the 16th, 2023. The tremors weren't natural. I've lived through enough disasters to recognize the difference between tectonic shifts and something deliberately generated. These quakes weren't random. They pulsed in measured intervals, like the heartbeat of something massive stirring beneath the ice. Back at Camp Argus, our seismic monitors were lighting up in patterns that no geologist could explain. The origin point was directly beneath the chamber we had just fled, but the shock waves radiated outward in a geometric spread that suggested intentionality. It felt like we had triggered some kind of ancient system, an activation sequence built into the structure itself. Dr. Holbrook remained sedated in the medical module, but he still mumbled incoherently in that bizarre alien tongue. Dr. Patricia Vance, our medical officer, was completely stumped. "His brain activity is beyond anything I've seen," she told General Morrison. "It's like his mind is processing information at 10 times the normal rate. If this continues, he'll suffer permanent damage, or worse, within hours." Morrison's reply was immediate and cold. "Then we extract whatever information we can before that happens." They brought in recording equipment to capture his speech, but most of what he said was unintelligible. Still, Dr. Chen was making slow progress decoding fragments of the speech. The more she translated, the more unsettling the content became. "He keeps repeating specific years," she confided to me, "dates that match global climate shifts, ice ages, warming events, extinction-level disruptions. And he says the same thing over and over. They return when the barriers fall." "Who returns?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "But from what I can tell, this isn't the first time. According to his words, these beings, whatever they are, have come back repeatedly throughout Earth's history, and each return lines up with a mass extinction event. That night, Dr. Holbrook died. Officially, they wrote it off as acute hypothermia worsened by altitude exposure. But I was there. I heard his final words. He looked directly at me, fully lucid, and spoke in flawless English. The Peary race map was right. They drew Antarctica without ice because they remembered it. Green, before the last awakening. I'd heard of the Peary race map, a 16th century chart supposedly depicting Antarctica centuries before its official discovery, and with no ice cover. Most historians dismissed it as coincidence or myth, but Holbrook was saying it was a memory. The following morning, I found something that shattered what remained of my understanding. While reviewing thermal satellite scans, I noticed something strange. The heat signatures we'd tracked, they weren't random anomalies. When mapped from above, they formed a shape. A very specific shape. It was a world map, but not the current one. The outlines reflected Earth's land masses during the Pangea era, hundreds of millions of years ago. The structures beneath the ice weren't merely a lost city, they were a record of Earth's geological evolution. Someone had observed this planet long before humans, and they had documented it in stone and metal. I rushed to share this discovery with Dr. Chen, but when I arrived at her module, it was empty. Her equipment was gone, her notes erased. No signs of struggle, no explanation. She had simply vanished. I confronted Colonel Webb. His answer was brief and unconvincing. Dr. Chen was evacuated overnight due to a medical emergency. All personnel are subject to immediate relocation under health and safety protocols. But I knew better. She had discovered too much, and someone had decided she wouldn't be allowed to take that knowledge any further. Later that afternoon, General Morrison gathered all remaining personnel. Her announcement was clinical. The mission, she claimed, was being terminated due to severe equipment failure and weather instability. We were to be evacuated within 24 hours. All data would be seized. Every recording, every document, every piece of physical evidence would be classified under the highest levels of national security. Furthermore, she added, each of you will be required to undergo debriefing and sign supplementary non-disclosure agreements. Any violation of these agreements will be considered treason against the United States. At that moment, I knew, even if I left Antarctica alive, I would never see the world the same way again. October 28, 1998. Classification Beyond Black, Eyes Only, Orion Clearance. Before the evacuation, I managed to breach the secure data systems General Morrison believed were locked beyond my access. 22 years in military intelligence teaches you how to find things no one wants you to see. What I discovered confirmed my worst suspicions. Project Echo 9 was not the first operation at this site. It wasn't even the third. The United States government had known about the structures beneath the Gamburtsev Mountains since the year 1947, when Admiral Richard Byrd's Operation High Jump encountered them during what was publicly described as a training exercise. The reality, buried deep in Navy archives, was far more troubling. Operation High Jump had been a 6-month mission involving over 4,700 military personnel and a large arsenal of equipment. Yet it was abruptly ended after just 8 weeks. Byrd's classified final report cited hostile action as the reason. Several aircraft were lost, and dozens of men never returned. The most damning line in the report was stark. It is necessary for the USA to take defensive action against enemy fighters originating from polar regions. Enemy fighters, in 1947, from polar regions? The Soviet files were even more damning. In 1956, during a Cold War-era cooperative venture, a joint Soviet-American team penetrated the same buried site we had explored. They made it farther than we ever did, several levels deeper. The outcome was disastrous. Of the 47 personnel who descended, only 12 returned. All survivors were committed to mental health institutions and never spoke publicly again. But one man, Soviet geologist Dr. Alexei Vulov, had smuggled out a single photo. It showed the same sarcophagus we had found. But this one was open. Inside, the elongated figure was seated upright and alive. The most chilling file was titled Historical Correlations, Ancient Cartography. It included detailed studies of the Piri Reis map, along with dozens of ancient sources that depicted Antarctica without ice. The evidence was overwhelming. Throughout history, various civilizations had known of the structures beneath the ice, and some had interacted with what lay there. Sumerian texts spoke of watchers from the southern ice who brought knowledge of math and astronomy. Mayan prophecies warned of the return of the ice lords when the glaciers began to thaw. Even the orientation of the Egyptian pyramids was linked to precise geospatial coordinates, including the position of Antarctica. This wasn't a cover-up of archaeology. It was the concealment of humanity's origin story. Civilization, as we knew it, had been influenced or manipulated by something not human, something ancient, patient, and now reawakening. The final file was a climate study commissioned by the Pentagon in 1987. It warned of catastrophic sea level rise due to melting Antarctic ice between the years 2020 and 2030. But hidden in the data was one sentence that explained everything. Thermal barrier integrity will be compromised by the year 2025, permitting activation of subsurface systems. They knew. The agencies, the military, the governments, they all knew. Climate change wasn't just a threat to cities and weather patterns. It was the trigger for something far older, something sleeping beneath the ice. March 17, 2023. The evacuation from Camp Argus was the most harrowing event of my life, and I'd faced hostile fire in 3 war zones. It wasn't the storm during the helicopter flight, or the engine trouble that nearly threw us into the Ross Ice Shelf. It was the knowledge that I would never be allowed to speak freely again. Debriefing took place at McMurdo Station, inside a prefab building that didn't appear on any official maps. For 6 days, I was interrogated by individuals from intelligence units I didn't recognize. They didn't want information. They wanted control. Every question was designed to measure what I knew and whether I posed a threat. On the 7th day, a man entered and introduced himself only as Mr. Gray. He looked to be in his 60s, his face weathered like someone who'd spent a lifetime in the world's harshest places. His badge said Department of Energy, but his demeanor radiated military intelligence. "Mr. Kessler," he said calmly, taking a seat across from me in the featureless room, "you've seen things most people could never comprehend, things that would cause widespread panic if they were ever made public." "You mean the structures beneath the ice?" I asked. He smiled, thin and cold. "I mean the implications of those structures. What do you think would happen if the world learned that human civilization has been influenced, perhaps even created, by non-human intelligence? That their faiths, their governments, their very history were built on falsehoods?" I said nothing. I didn't need to. "It would be chaos," he answered for me. "The end of modern civilization." He leaned forward. "Which is why certain truths must remain hidden, no matter the cost to those who uncover them." He slid a document across the table. It was thicker than the original non-disclosure agreement I had signed, its dense legal jargon effectively revoking my right to ever speak of the mission or its discoveries. The consequences for breaking the agreement included life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. "What about the others?" I asked. "Dr. Chen, the technicians, the rest of the team?" Mr. Gray's expression remained unchanged. "Dr. Chen suffered an unfortunate accident during her return to the United States. The technicians have been reassigned to projects more appropriate for their level of expertise. You're the only one with comprehensive knowledge of the mission. You're saying I'm the last witness? I'm saying you're the only one still alive who understands the full scope of what Project Echo 9 uncovered." The implication was unambiguous. Either sign the agreement and remain silent, or share the fate of those who'd met accidents. So I signed. But signing that paper didn't sever my connection to what we found beneath the ice. In the years that followed, I was contacted periodically by government officials claiming to monitor my psychological adjustment. the signals beneath. No one predicted this. I've monitored Antarctic climate patterns for over 2 decades, and nothing compares to the acceleration we've seen over the past 5 years. The West Antarctic ice sheet is disintegrating at a rate that suggests full collapse within a decade. But it's the East sheet, the one covering the Gamburts of mountains, that truly concerns me. That region was supposed to be stable. Instead, it's fracturing. And more alarming than the melt is the seismic activity. Since the year 2018, the Gamburtsev region has experienced more than 300 earthquakes measuring magnitude 4.0 or higher. That's more than the entire previous 50 years combined. These tremors are clustered, rhythmic, and spatially consistent with what we would expect if massive underground structures were shifting or activating. The thermal signatures are evolving too. The heat sources we first detected back in 1998 have increased by over 400%. This is not geological. These readings suggest technological systems buried beneath the ice are becoming more active as the glacial cover thins. What terrifies me most isn't the phenomenon itself, it's the response. The government is fully aware of what's happening. Not only are they concealing the truth, but they're actively preventing any investigation. The Gamburtsev region has been designated a restricted zone. Scientific expeditions are forbidden. Unauthorized aircraft are subject to military interception. The official reason? Environmental protection. Meanwhile, disturbing phenomena are surfacing globally. Patterns that align suspiciously with increased activity in Antarctica. Deep-sea biologists are reporting mass die-offs among abyssal species. Astronomers are detecting non-natural radio emissions originating from Antarctic coordinates. And since 2020, there have been at least 12 reported sightings of unidentified aerial vehicles in the Southern Ocean, all from commercial pilots who later recanted under government pressure. I've reached out to survivors from prior Antarctic missions. Most are dead, missing, or too frightened to talk. But in 2019, I made contact with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a geologist from a Chilean expedition in 2007. Her team was evacuated just 3 days into their mission, and she was institutionalized shortly after for what authorities called altitude-induced psychosis. She wasn't psychotic, she was traumatized. We met discreetly in a quiet cafe in Santiago. What she shared matched my own experiences, but with chilling additions. Her team had located a natural opening revealed by melting ice, a cave, not the artificial shaft we had drilled. They descended only 50 feet before encountering active technology. Walls that lit up in response to movement, shifting symbols that glowed, and sounds that felt mechanical, but sentient. "They're waking up," she told me, her hands trembling. "Whatever's down there has been dormant for thousands of years, but the ice melt is triggering reactivation protocols. These aren't ruins. This is a functioning infrastructure responding to environmental changes." She showed me photographs, symbols etched into walls, eerily similar to the ones we saw in 1998. When shown to an expert in ancient cartography, he noted parallels with the Piri Reis map and other pre-modern documents that depicted Antarctica without its ice sheet. "They're not ornamental," she said. "They're maps, star charts, coordinates. They show Earth as it was in the past, and as it will be when the ice is gone." The realization was staggering. Whatever intelligence lies beneath Antarctica hasn't merely observed Earth's geological history, it's predicted it. Climate change isn't an accident of industrialization. It's part of a repeating cycle, foreseen, and perhaps triggered by entities that predate humanity. Dr. Vasquez died 6 months later in a car accident. Her vehicle's brake lines had been cut. Personal archive. Daniel Kessler. March 2023. As I compile these final records, the signs are undeniable. We are approaching the final phase of whatever cycle has been orchestrated by the intelligence buried beneath Antarctica. The thermal footprint now spans over 1,000 square miles, far larger than we estimated in 1998, and similar anomalies are now appearing in formerly glaciated regions across the globe: northern Canada, Siberia, Greenland, even in parts of the Sahara that were once covered in ice during ancient ice ages. This is a global network. What we found isn't confined to Antarctica. It's part of a planet-wide infrastructure that has been monitoring and influencing Earth's environment for millions of years. Recent satellite data shows that these global thermal sources are synchronizing. Pulses from the Antarctic site are being echoed by matching signals in Alaska, Russia, and Greenland. It's not random, it's coordination, a communication lattice activating across the globe. The timeline, decoded by Dr. Chen in the chamber, didn't signal destruction, it forecast emergence. 3 weeks ago, a package arrived at my door, no return address. Inside was a single underwater photograph, likely taken by a deep-sea submersible. It showed the seafloor off the Antarctic coast, but instead of sediment and rock, it revealed structures, black stone constructs identical to those found beneath the ice. Lights glowed within. Surrounding them were patterns of bioluminescence, geometrically arranged, almost like writing. Attached was a note, scrawled by hand. "They're not waking up. They're coming home." Yesterday, the first official reports emerged. Multiple naval vessels have detected sonar contacts in the Southern Ocean, large, fast-moving underwater objects with no known origin. The public explanation? A previously unidentified whale species. I know better. The countdown has ended. The barriers have collapsed. And after 25 years of enforced silence, the truth must finally be told. Final audio log, Daniel Kessler. March 19th, 2023. This is my last recording. Outside my apartment, unmarked vehicles have been idling for nearly an hour. I can hear them now, doors opening, footsteps on gravel. I don't have much time, but it doesn't matter. The knowledge I've gathered over the past 25 years is already in the hands of people who can't be silenced like I was. The truth is out. About the mission. About Antarctica. About the intelligence that shaped human civilization long before we learned to write. There's one last revelation, one I've only recently come to understand, and it changes everything. They are not extraterrestrial. They are from Earth. They emerged millions of years ago, built advanced technology, created a planetary monitoring system, and then went dormant, buried by the ice ages that followed. The elongated skulls, the crystalline systems, the global seismic response, they all point to a civilization that thrived here before us. And now, as the planet warms, they are reawakening. Not as invaders, but as inhabitants returning to reclaim a world that was always theirs. The ice isn't just exposing their cities, it's exposing our arrogance. We believed we were alone, the pinnacle of evolution, but the melting glaciers reveal something older, wiser, and infinitely more powerful. This was never our planet. Dr. Holbrook was right. We are not ready. Not because they seek to destroy us, but because we built our entire civilization on the belief that we were in control. We're not. We never were. The cities beneath the ice are not relics, they are facilities. Dormant systems awaiting reactivation. The Piri Reis map was accurate, because it was based on records maintained by those same systems. Every advanced civilization, Egyptian, Sumerian, Mayan, was touched by this intelligence. Every great leap in math, astronomy, architecture, it all came from them. Now they're awakening. The hallway outside is full of movement. Voices, radio chatter. They've come for me. They probably found the backup files, too. But it's too late now. The ice is melting too fast. The seismic waveforms too strong. The global systems have already activated. Within 5 years, perhaps sooner, humanity will witness the rise of a civilization that renders ours primitive. Whether we survive will depend on whether we can accept being the junior species on a planet we were merely renting. There, at the door, I can hear them moving into position. Calm, clinical, precise, just like I was trained to be. I'm not afraid. Carrying this truth for 25 years has been its own kind of prison. But now I'm free. To whoever hears this, the countdown is over. The barriers are gone. The true story of Earth is about to begin. This is Daniel Kessler, former military cartographer and last witness of Project Echo 9, signing off. Audio recording ends at 23:47:12 GMT, March 19, 2023. Device recovered at Apartment 2C, 247 Arlington Boulevard. Resident Daniel Kessler missing. Subject's status unknown. All records sealed under National Security Directive 7741 Omega. Agent Morrison, Department of Homeland Security, Special Activities Division. Anonymous data dump. June 15, 2025. The files attributed to Daniel Kessler appeared simultaneously on more than 200 websites across the globe on June 15th, exactly 27 months after his disappearance. Despite immediate intervention by national and international agencies, the files were downloaded millions of times within the first 24 hours. Alongside the audio logs and expedition reports was an extensive archive of satellite images, seismic data, and classified intelligence documents, each piece corroborating Kessler's claims of anomalous activity beneath Antarctica. Independent analysts authenticated the satellite data, confirming massive heat signatures beneath the Gamburtsev Mountains. More alarming were similar signatures found in Alaska, Siberia, and Greenland. One particular set of photographs, taken over several years by deep-sea research teams, showed partially submerged structures off Antarctica's continental shelf, precisely matching those described in Kessler's final transmission. As time progressed, these photographs depicted a steady increase in internal illumination and apparent system activation, as if the structures were awakening. The most unsettling part of the data release was the final document, a classified climate model predicting that, within 3 years, accelerated glacial melt would expose vast areas of the Antarctic substructure. If accurate, these projections implied that humanity was on the brink of encountering something hidden for millennia. As of this report, 17 commercial airline pilots have filed statements regarding unidentified aerial phenomena rising from the Southern Ocean. Marine biologists have documented the appearance of entirely new species of bioluminescent deep-sea life, bearing geometric patterns identical to ancient carvings cited in Kessler's notes. Global seismic stations have also begun recording synchronized low-frequency vibrations emanating from regions long dormant since the last ice age, suggesting the coordinated reactivation of a planet-wide system. Officials from multiple governments have declined to comment on the Kessler materials, invoking national security. Yet recently declassified files from the mid-20th century confirm that both Operation High Jump and Cold War-era Soviet missions reported anomalous activity in Antarctica, leading to unexplained mission terminations and permanent file sealing. Whether Kessler's testimony is authentic or the work of masterful fabrication may soon be irrelevant. The ice continues to vanish at unprecedented speed. The thermal signals continue to intensify. Just as Kessler warned, the countdown is over. The seals are breaking, and we may be forced to accept a truth long buried under ice, that we have never truly been alone. The real question now is not if an intelligence beneath Antarctica is awakening, but whether humanity is capable of facing what comes next. Recovered journal entry: Eli Granger. Classification: redacted subject. Eli Granger, independent journalist. Date range: July 15th to 18th, 2023. Location: Bohemian Grove, Monte Rio, California. The following account was extracted from an encrypted server in Iceland. The current whereabouts of the journalist remain unknown. My name is Eli Granger. I'm writing this now because I may not live long enough to speak it aloud. What I saw in the redwoods of Northern California will never leave me. It began 3 weeks ago with an email that shouldn't have existed. I was in my cramped Oakland apartment, halfway through my third cup of coffee, scanning encrypted whistleblower forums when I received a ping. The email was from an address composed entirely of random characters and routed through 7 proxy servers. There was no subject, only an attachment and 4 cryptic lines. You want truth? Go to the redwoods. Bring a black suit and a quiet soul. July 15th through 18th. The fire reveals all. The attachment was a high-resolution scan of a guest registry from the Bohemian Grove, the elusive, men-only retreat where the elite allegedly gather each summer to commune with nature. I'd written about it before, mostly, based on old secondhand stories and faded photographs from the 1980s. But this was different. The names on the list turned my blood cold. Former presidents, sitting senators, CEOs of megacorporations, defense contractors, pharmaceutical tycoons, media barons, all scheduled to attend something called the Midsummer Encampment. At the bottom of the scan was a forged access badge bearing my face. It was a professionally edited photo of me in a black suit and tie, an image I'd never taken or submitted. The name read, Edmund Gray, logistics consultant, Prometheus Industries. Someone powerful wanted me inside that forest. I had to know why. I should have ignored it. Deleted the email, gone back to writing exposés on corporate tax evasion and city hall bribes. But I didn't. Instead, I packed a black suit and headed north into Sonoma County. The drive through the redwoods was breathtaking. Ancient trees towering over winding roads, the sunlight reduced to golden shafts in perpetual twilight. It felt peaceful, but as I learned in naval intelligence, the most dangerous truths often hide in the most beautiful places. I booked a motel in Guerneville and scoped out the grove that night. It spans over 2,000 acres, all surrounded by fences topped with razor wire, surveillance every 50 feet, and guards in black tactical gear. This wasn't a summer camp. It was a fortified installation. To my surprise, the forged badge worked flawlessly. The guards scanned it, verified my face, and waved me through without a word. Either the forger was a genius, or someone wanted me in badly. Inside the grove, it looked like something out of a surreal dream. Towering redwoods, whimsical lodge names like Caveman's Den and Dragon's Perch, and gravel paths winding between fire pits and old-fashioned cabins. It might have been charming, if not for the unsettling stillness beneath it all. The guests walked with an air of absolute confidence. Men who knew they shaped global policy with a phone call. Casual by day, clad in khakis and polos, but I overheard snippets that betrayed far more sinister influence. The Shanghai Index will drop exactly 17%. Tell the secretary nightfall is greenlit for October. Media blackout should hold for at least 72 hours. I posed as a logistics consultant. The role allowed me to move quietly, clipboard in hand, camera phone replaced with a locked, approved device. No guest questioned me. To them, I was just another invisible functionary. But then, I began noticing the symbols. Owls. Everywhere. Etched into tree trunks, carved into benches, hidden in lamppost bases. Not friendly storybook owls, these were angular, expressionless watchers. The centerpiece was a 40-foot statue of an owl on an island in the lake. Even in broad daylight, it emanated a sense of cold, ancient power. Beautiful, isn't it? An elderly man had appeared beside me, silver-haired, tanned, his pale blue eyes almost translucent. "The owl of Bohemia," he said. "Been watching over us for over a century. Some say it's symbolic. Others know better." "Know what exactly?" He smiled. Perfectly white teeth, too flawless for his age. "You'll see tonight, Mr. Gray. The cremation of care waits for no one, not even consultants." That evening, the grove changed. Casual laughter vanished. Hooded robes appeared. Men emerged from their cabins in silence, clutching torches and strange ceremonial objects. A robe awaited me too, hanging in my cabin. A note lay folded inside. "Attendance is mandatory. Silence is sacred. The owl sees all." What followed was the most horrifying performance I've ever witnessed. Hundreds of robed men marched toward the lake, torches flickering beneath the canopy. They surrounded the massive owl statue. A boat floated on the water, carrying what looked disturbingly like a child-sized effigy wrapped in white cloth. I told myself it wasn't real. It had to be fake. But the cloth clung too naturally to the form beneath it, and its proportions were perfect. From the platform beside the owl, a hooded figure began to speak. I recognized the voice instantly. A former U.S. president. "Brothers of the Grove," he called, "we gather again to free ourselves from the chains of conscience. We cast care into the flames," the crowd thundered. They chanted for nearly an hour, invocations to ancient gods, Moloch, Enlil, names pulled from Sumerian and Carthaginian lore. My skin crawled as I recognized the patterns. It wasn't theater. These men believed. The boat was set aflame. Whether what I saw burning was cloth or something else, I can't say, but the crowd's reaction, tears from some, rapture from others, suggested something more than symbolism. As the gathering dispersed, a hand gripped my shoulder. "Mr. Gray," said the old man again. "You've been selected for the inner circle." I wanted to refuse. Two men stepped beside me. Escorts, not bodyguards. I understood. This wasn't optional. They led me deeper into the woods, to a stone-lined fire pit surrounded by 30 masked men. The robes were gone, replaced by bone-white owl masks with empty eyes. The ritual began. The chants were in a language I recognized from training, Akkadian, dead for over 2 millennia. I'd seen it in declassified CIA documents, Project MK-Ultra experiments with ritual programming, and sigils designed to bypass cognitive resistance. Maps were unrolled. Not of nations, but economic zones and population centers. Strategies were outlined, conflicts planned, markets shaped. These men weren't pledging loyalty to governments or people. They were serving something older, something hidden. As dawn approached, the masks came off. Presidents, CEOs, senators, all shaking hands like they'd just closed another deal. I knew I couldn't stay, but I had to see one more place. A lodge marked Styx, hidden on the property, not on any guest map. And I had the means to get in. The lodge's interior was a deception. Behind a false wall, accessible through a hidden panel, was a staircase carved directly into the bedrock beneath the forest floor. The descent led into ancient stonework far older than the building above. The passage was narrow, lit by modern electrical wiring awkwardly fitted into what had once been torch sconces. At the bottom of the stairs stood a heavy oak door, aged and iron-bound. When it creaked open, the sight beyond took my breath away. The chamber was impossibly large, far exceeding the structural footprint of the lodge above. Its walls were lined with stone shelves, each holding leather-bound journals, parchment scrolls, and relics from centuries past. At the center stood a monolithic table, carved from a single piece of polished black stone. On its surface lay a disarray of maps, blueprints, and sealed government documents stamped with insignias from across decades and nations. I began with the journals, choosing one randomly from a shelf labeled 1923 to 1945. The handwriting inside was elegant, meticulous, but the content was horrifying. The European situation is proceeding as planned. Our agents in Berlin believe they are serving the Reich, but they unknowingly aid the ancient ones. The purge of lesser populations shall fuel the spiritual energies necessary for the next phase of the great work. Another volume, more recent, read, Operation Mockingbird has surpassed expectations. Media outlets follow directives without hesitation, believing themselves to uphold journalistic ideals. In reality, they manufacture consensus and reinforce control narratives. The populace consumes whatever reality we construct. But the documents on the central table revealed the real architecture of global manipulation. I saw blueprints for the USA Patriot Act, dated 6 months before the events of September 11th. Battle plans for Iraq, complete with fabricated intelligence on weapons of mass destruction. There were outlines for social media algorithms, engineered not to connect people, but to divide them into factions, ripe for exploitation and control. More recent plans made my blood run cold. Global pandemic protocols designed for authoritarian enforcement rather than public health. Digital currency infrastructures aimed at eliminating personal financial freedom, and population reduction proposals, thinly disguised as climate initiatives. The most chilling artifact of all was a list, a comprehensive roster of participants stretching back to the Bohemian Club's founding in the 1870s. The names were recognizable from history books and boardrooms alike: Gilded Age industrialists, political architects of the 20th century, figures I'd seen earlier at the encampment, walking freely through the grove. That was the moment I realized. The email, the access pass, the seamless infiltration, it had all been a test. And I was failing. A motion sensor pinged softly from behind me. Red lights blinked to life along the stone walls. In the distance, I heard boots on stone. Measured, tactical steps descending the staircase. I grabbed as many documents as I could, shoved them into my jacket, and scanned the room for another exit. There wasn't one. The doorway I'd entered was the only opening, and it was rapidly filling with voices and boots that spoke the language of military coordination. And then the lights went out. Emergency lighting activated moments later, bathing the chamber in a crimson glow. In that brief darkness, something impossible happened. I heard a voice, not with my ears but inside my mind, a voice that bypassed sound entirely and spoke directly to thought. Run, little journalist, run and carry the truth to the surface. But know this, the telling will be your undoing, and salvation for the world demands sacrifices greater than one man's life. When the red light stabilized, a section of the wall had shifted. A narrow tunnel now stood open, carved into the stone, disappearing into darkness. I didn't hesitate. Whatever had just spoken, be it one of the ancient ones or something else entirely, it had offered me a path out. The tunnels beneath the grove formed a vast, ancient labyrinth. Carved stone gave way to natural caves, and the passages were veined with phosphorescent moss that glowed just enough to guide my steps. The air was thick but breathable. Symbols lined the walls, some matching the sigils from the inner circle ritual, But here they were older, worn by time and movement. Centuries had passed since these paths were first carved. Behind me, I heard movement, faint echoes of radio static, flashlight beams darting across walls, footsteps searching. But the sounds gradually faded. Either they couldn't locate the entrance, or they were unwilling to follow me into these deeper, older places. Eventually, the tunnel began to incline. I smelled rain and vegetation, fresh air. The exit was obscured by vines and moss, hidden in a thicket several miles from the main grove compound. As I emerged into the forest, thunder rolled overhead. Heavy raindrops began to fall. Perfect cover, if I could reach my car before the perimeter expanded. But I wasn't alone. Figures moved among the trees. Not soldiers, something else. They wore the same bone-white owl masks as the inner circle, but their movements were unnatural. Too smooth, too fast, and their eyes glowed, dimly, with a light that didn't come from the storm. "The journalist sees too much," one of them said. The words were perfectly clear despite the wind. "The ancient ones are displeased," another replied. "But the pact must be honored. He was brought here for a purpose. Let him carry the message to the surface. Let them know what approaches." I ran. Behind me came no pursuit, only the sound of laughter, inhuman and echoing through the trees. Not laughter born of joy, but something darker. The sound of predators who know their prey can flee, but never truly escape. I reached the car just as the storm intensified. Rain pounded the windshield as I peeled away into the night, avoiding highways, taking side roads, constantly checking my mirrors. The documents in my coat felt like coals pressed against my chest, but I had them. I had evidence. Or so I thought. I uploaded everything to an offshore server in Iceland. Documents, photos, audio logs, notes, encrypted, fragmented, backed up multiple times. Within 6 hours, all of it was corrupted or wiped clean. Every single file. My apartment was broken into while I was out. Nothing stolen, but every piece of hardware destroyed. Laptop, phone, cameras, backup drives, all gone. The mainstream media ignored my story. Alternative outlets expressed brief interest, then went silent. Forum posts were deleted within minutes. It was as though the entire internet had been scrubbed clean. And then the dream started. Night after night I see them, the ancient ones, towering forms with endless limbs, eyes like galaxies, voices like collapsing stars. They show me futures they are shaping, worlds of drowning cities, blackened skies, and humanity enslaved under cosmic indifference. They tell me I am not a witness, not a threat. I am a vessel, a messenger. They wanted me to see it, not to warn the world. Warnings suggest resistance. No, they want despair. They want belief to rot, hope to die. And every word I write, every truth I try to spread, is another step in their design. The erosion of trust, the seeding of inevitability. I'm writing this from a cheap motel in Reno. I haven't stayed in one place for more than a few hours, but I know it's pointless. They're not chasing me. They don't have to. I'm already carrying the infection of knowledge. Just remembering is enough. Tonight I'll drive east, toward the desert. Maybe I'll find some way to disrupt their plan. Or maybe I'll vanish into the wasteland, taking the truth with me. But if you're reading this, if this message somehow slipped past their control, then remember, they don't burn away care. They burn away conscience, and when the fire dies, the world grows colder. Shadows lengthen. And in those shadows, something very old and very hungry is waiting to be born. The Dyatlov Pass Incident, an unraveling mystery. Tonight, I'll guide you through one of the most chilling and enduring enigmas of the Cold War. Picture this: winter, 1959, deep in the Ural Mountains. A group of Soviet hikers huddles inside a canvas tent on the slopes of a peak, ominously named Dead Mountain. They laugh, write in their journals, plan their route for the next day. None of them knows that this night will be their last. This is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery that has haunted historians and investigators for more than 60 years. My name is James. I've spent weeks combing through declassified case files, journal entries, autopsy reports, and survivor accounts. The deeper I dive, the more this case feels like a puzzle where every piece makes the picture stranger. It all began in late January of 1959, when 10 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out to reach Mount Otorten. They were all in their 20s, except one older instructor, and the group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student. On January 23rd, they left Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg, by train. Imagine them then, spirited, confident, full of youthful fire, strumming songs on a mandolin someone had brought along. After a 2-day journey by train, they reached Ivdel, a town on the edge of the northern Urals, also the site of a Soviet penal colony. From there, they traveled by bus, then hitched a ride in a lumber truck to Vijay, the last settlement before the wilderness. On January 27th, they began their trek. One member, Yuri Yudin, had struggled with health issues, including rheumatism. By the next day, his condition worsened. He made the difficult decision to turn back, unaware that he had just saved his own life. Yudin would become the expedition's sole survivor. He would never see his friends again. The remaining 9 hikers continued their trek into the wilderness, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Thanks to recovered photographs and journals, investigators were able to reconstruct much of their route. By the 31st of January, the group had reached the edge of a highland region and stored surplus supplies in a wooded valley, intending to retrieve them on the return journey. Spirits remained high. They joked among themselves, snapped photographs, and even created a mock newsletter they titled The Evening Otorten. One humorous entry proclaimed, "Now we know for sure that the snowmen exist," likely a tongue-in-cheek nod to local Yeti folklore. On the 1st of February, the hikers began to ascend a mountain pass, one that would later bear Dyatlov's name. Their plan had been to cross the pass and set camp on the other side, but the weather turned against them. Fierce winds and a whiteout snowstorm obscured their path. Disoriented by the storm, they veered westward, unknowingly ending up on the slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakho, meaning Dead Mountain in the indigenous Mansi language. Realizing the error too late in the day, and with visibility close to zero, Dyatlov made a fateful decision. Rather than descend the 1.5 kilometers into the forested area below for shelter, he opted to pitch the tent on the exposed slope. Perhaps he wanted to avoid losing the elevation they had gained, or perhaps it was an attempt to demonstrate their ability to camp in extreme conditions. Whatever his reasoning, the 9 campers cut a platform into the snow and set up their large tent on the barren mountainside. This decision would be heavily questioned in the investigations to follow. That night, February 1st, 1959, must have been brutally cold. Temperatures dropped to approximately minus 20 degrees Celsius, with winds howling across the pass. Yet, inside the tent, the group remained insulated from the storm. Forensic evidence showed they ate a warm dinner between 6 and 7 p.m. A final photograph from one of their cameras shows them smiling, appearing relaxed while preparing camp during the twilight hours. Despite the freezing wind outside, they still managed to write in their journals and converse before settling in for the night. They had no way of knowing what horrors awaited them in the hours ahead. In the darkness of early February 2nd, something occurred. Something that defied explanation. There were no surviving witnesses, only cryptic evidence left behind. At some point after midnight, the tent was slashed open from within. The 9 hikers, whether asleep or resting, fled into the raging blizzard with alarming urgency. Most left behind boots, jackets, even basic winter gear, as if escaping some immediate and terrifying threat. It was minus 30 degrees Celsius, and yet they ran into the night barefoot, underdressed, and disoriented. What could have compelled them to abandon their only shelter in such conditions? That question has haunted researchers and investigators for more than 6 decades. When the group failed to return to Vigier by the expected date of February 12th, there was little initial concern. Delays were common for winter expeditions, but as days passed with no contact, the hikers' families became increasingly alarmed. On February 20th, they demanded a search operation. Volunteers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute were dispatched to retrace the route. Soon, local police and military units joined the effort, using aircraft and helicopters to scan the region. Rescuers endured harsh weather and deep snow, scouring miles of desolate terrain. Among them was student Mikhail Sharavin. On February 26th, he made a chilling discovery. While moving along the slope of Kholat Shyakhol, Sharavin noticed something protruding from the snow, a corner of fabric. As they dug closer, it became clear. It was the tent, collapsed, half buried, yet still distinguishable. The canvas had been slashed open from the inside. Despite snow accumulation, the interior appeared disturbingly orderly. Blankets, clothing, boots, axes, flashlights, a map, official documents, a pile of currency, even a plate with the sliced salo, pork fat, remained undisturbed. It appeared the group had been interrupted mid-meal and left everything behind in a panic. The scene gave Sharavin and his team chills. Why would trained hikers voluntarily destroy their tent and flee into deadly conditions without shoes or coats? Outside, footprints deepened the mystery. 9 sets, consistent with the group's number, trailed away from the tent. Some were barefoot, others showed only socks or a single boot. You could make out toes in the frozen snow. The tracks weren't chaotic. They moved in an orderly line, suggesting a rapid but controlled retreat. Rescuers followed them for over 500 meters toward the tree line, where the prints vanished beneath new snowfall. It seemed the group was heading toward the forest, perhaps seeking shelter or regrouping. The following day, search teams widened the area and moved toward the trees. At the edge of the forest, beneath a tall Siberian cedar, they found a small fire's charred remains, and beside it, the first 2 bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were lying side by side, barefoot, dressed only in their underwear. The cedar's lower branches were broken up to 5 meters high. Skin and cloth fragments on the bark suggested one or both men had climbed it, perhaps searching for the tent in the darkness or fleeing something. Krivonishenko's body had burns. More disturbingly, he had a chunk of flesh missing from his hand. Bitten off, possibly in agony or desperation as hypothermia set in. Their limbs were discolored with frostbite. The fire they built had burned briefly before extinguishing. Roughly 300 meters from the cedar, back toward the tent, they found Igor Dyatlov's body. He lay face up, head oriented toward the tent, as if trying to crawl back. He wore a flannel shirt, a sweater, pants, but no coat or boots. One arm extended upward, grasping a birch twig. The other was pressed against his chest. His eyes were open, his expression oddly peaceful. Witnesses later speculated he had been holding something near his heart, perhaps a notebook or a photograph, though nothing significant was found. Not far away lay Zenaida Kolmogorova. She was better dressed than Igor, wearing layered clothing but no shoes, just socks. Her body was positioned as if she'd been crawling uphill, hands reaching toward the tent. A long red bruise stretched along her torso, consistent with blunt force trauma, possibly from a baton or rifle butt. No other major injuries were present. It wasn't until March 5th that rescuers located the fifth body, Rustem Slobodin. He lay face down in the snow, about 480 meters from the cedar, roughly halfway back to the tent. He was more warmly dressed than the others, multiple layers of clothing and a single boot. A closed pocket knife was clenched in one hand. An autopsy later revealed a skull fracture about 7 inches long, but it wasn't considered fatal. The medical examiner believed Slobodin had suffered the injury during a fall and continued moving for at least an hour afterward. Like the others, he had succumbed to the cold. His shattered wristwatch was frozen at 8:45, though the exact date and time remained uncertain. Imagine the burden carried by Yuri Yudin, the lone survivor, tasked with identifying the bodies of his friends. The 5 corpses were flown to Evdel for autopsies. Yudin confirmed their identities, but 4 members of the expedition were still missing. Weeks passed. As spring thawed the mountain snow, nature slowly revealed its secrets. On May 4th, a Mansi tribesman named Kurikov, assisting in the search, noticed torn scraps of clothing near a ravine deeper into the forest. Nearby, buried under nearly 4 meters of snow, lay the final 4 bodies: Lyudmila Dubinina, Semen Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, and Alexander Kolovatov. They were discovered in a rocky gully about 75 meters past the cedar tree. These 4 were better clothed than the others, some wearing garments taken from their deceased companions. Dubinina wore Krivonishenko's torn trousers, and her feet were wrapped in a piece of his sweater. Zolotaryov wore her faux fur coat. Kolovatov had layered himself in someone else's sweater and pants. This grim redistribution of clothing hinted at the survivors' final efforts to stay alive. But the condition of these bodies raised more alarming questions. 3 of the 4 had suffered catastrophic internal injuries. Thibault Brignol had a crushed skull with an 8-inch fracture. Dubinina and Zolotaryov each had massive chest trauma. 10 ribs broken in her case, 5 in his. A forensic pathologist compared the force required to a car crash. Yet, strangely, none of them had external bruising or lacerations matching such violence. It was as though their bodies had been compressed by a force that did not break the skin. Perhaps a pressure wave or immense compression. Kolovatov's injuries were less extreme: a broken nose, a wound behind his ear, and a twisted neck. He likely died of hypothermia, though trauma may have contributed. Then came the truly macabre details. All 4 had facial soft tissue damage. Dubinina was missing her eyes, tongue, lips, and part of her skull. Zolotaryov had no eyeballs. Kolovatov's eyebrows were gone. These grotesque injuries fueled wild speculation. Were they attacked? Mutilated? Yet forensic analysts offered a grimly natural explanation. The bodies had lain in a shallow stream for months, exposed to water, cold, and scavengers. Tissue loss was likely post-mortem. Even so, Dubinina's stomach contained 100 grams of coagulated blood, suggesting her heart was still beating when her tongue was removed, meaning it may have been torn away very shortly after death. To complicate matters further, Zolotaryov was found with a camera around his neck, one not logged among the group's known equipment. In his hand was a pencil, and beneath it a notepad, blank, as if he had tried and failed to record their final moments. All of it pointed to something more than natural disaster. And more than 6 decades later, the mystery remains unsolved. The investigators in 1959 were at a complete loss to explain what had happened. As required by protocol, especially given the presence of injuries, a formal criminal inquest was opened. One of the first suspicions centered on the native Mansi people, reindeer herders indigenous to the region. Some theorized the group may have been attacked for trespassing on sacred ground, but that line of inquiry quickly fell apart. The only footprints at the site belonged to the hikers, and there was no sign of physical struggle. In fact, the Mansi assisted in the search effort and had no history of violence toward outsiders. Next, the possibility of an avalanche was explored. But inconsistencies in the scene, particularly the undisturbed tent and the direction of the footprints, cast doubt on that theory. We'll revisit this shortly. The idea of a wild animal attack was also raised, but again, there were no tracks from large predators, and the injuries sustained didn't align with claw or bite marks. Ultimately, Soviet officials concluded that no other humans or animals had been involved. One forensic examiner famously stated that the force responsible for the chest injuries of Dubinina and Zolotaryov was greater than anything a human could inflict. Then came a strange twist. Radiation. When some of the clothing was tested, abnormal levels of radioactivity were found. Dubinina's brown sweater and Krivonishenko's wool pants were notably contaminated. This wasn't something anyone would have suspected during a typical mountaineering mishap. The radioactive trace was only discovered because one investigator happened to have access to a Geiger counter. This odd discovery sparked speculation that the group may have encountered some classified weapon or residual fallout. But upon closer review, a more mundane explanation emerged. Krivonishenko had previously worked at the Mayak nuclear plant and was involved in the cleanup of the Kishtim disaster in 1957, one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. His clothing may have carried residual contamination. Similarly, Kolevatov had studied nuclear physics and worked at a top-secret research institute in Moscow. In short, the presence of radiation may have had nothing to do with the tragedy. Still, the unsettling detail of discolored skin and prematurely gray hair on some of the bodies unnerved their families. Officials explained the skin changes as mummification from prolonged exposure to sun and cold, and said the hair color could change from chemical exposure or embalming. But to grieving parents, radiation and orange skin sounded more like elements of a cover-up than a natural death. By May of 1959, the investigation was quietly coming to a close. Still without answers. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov was under mounting pressure to file a report. In his final statement, Ivanov wrote that the hikers had died due to an unknown compelling force. The phrase was a vague catch-all that satisfied no one. With no identifiable suspect or perpetrator, the case was closed without criminal charges. The files were classified and sealed. Moreover, the Dyatlov Pass region was declared off-limits to further expeditions for the next 3 years, officially to prevent future tragedies. Unofficially, many suspected the government wanted to limit any further scrutiny. The final ruling, that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force, only raised more questions. Consider the weight of that silence. 9 young people gone, and the state essentially told their families, "You will never know why." In the Soviet Union of the late 50s, that was the end of it. Some relatives believed otherwise. Igor Dyatlov's parents, Zina Kolmogoreva's mother, and others received veiled warnings not to press further. They were told, quite bluntly, "You will never know the truth. Stop asking questions." And in that era, when the KGB said stop, you stopped. The families were forced to bury their children without answers. Over time, the Dyatlov Pass incident faded into legend, whispered about in hiking clubs, passed down in quiet stories, spoken of in hushed tones. As for Yuri Yudin, the lone survivor, He carried the weight of that mystery for the rest of his life. Racked with survivor's guilt, he never believed the official explanation. Uden was convinced that his friends had not died because of nature alone. In interviews before his death in 2013, he voiced suspicions that the Soviet government knew far more than it ever revealed. In his final years, Uden publicly stated that he believed his friends were forced out of the tent at gunpoint and executed. He even speculated that Dubinina's tongue had been cut out because she had spoken out. These were serious accusations, impossible to prove. Uden admitted he had no hard evidence, only a lifetime of suspicion, unanswered questions, and a gut feeling he couldn't shake. And so here we are, decades later, still piecing together fragments of a mystery that refuses to be solved. As a modern-day researcher, I've combed through every surviving report and theory. I've stood on that frozen slope and felt the wind from Dead Mountain whisper through the trees. The Dyatlov Pass incident endures precisely because it exists in that uncanny space between fact and folklore, between science and the inexplicable. Over the years, dozens of theories have emerged, some rational, some extraordinary. Let's explore those theories one by one, following each investigative path to see where it leads. To be credible, any explanation must address all the strange details, the slashed tent, the state of undress, the baffling injuries, the presence of radiation, the reports of lights in the sky, and the silence that followed. It's a tall order, but we owe it to them to try. The first and most widely accepted explanation, at least by the modern Russian government, is the avalanche theory. On its surface, it seems the most reasonable. Picture it. The hikers are asleep on the slope when a slab of snow above them gives way. They hear the ominous shift and feel the tent begin to collapse. In a moment of panic, they believe a full avalanche is upon them. They cut the tent open from the inside to escape quickly. Perhaps the entrance was blocked or buried, and flee into the darkness with only what they're wearing. This scenario gained new traction in 2019, when Russian authorities reopened the investigation and reaffirmed the slab avalanche as the official cause of death. Later that year, a team of scientists used advanced modeling to show that under rare conditions, a small slab avalanche could indeed have occurred on that slope. Their simulations supported the plausibility of such an event. The avalanche theory also offers plausible explanations for many of the facts. The group slashed their way out because they believed they were in imminent danger. They headed toward the forest in search of shelter. The crushing injuries could have resulted from the pressure of compacted snow. The bodies in the ravine may have been softened by stream exposure over months, explaining the missing soft tissue. Radiation? Likely an unrelated artifact from earlier nuclear work, but the theory has critics. First, the slope of Kolatchakal is relatively shallow, 15 to 20 degrees, which is not typical terrain for avalanches. Second, there were no obvious signs of avalanche debris, no path, no displacement. An avalanche typically leaves a distinct pattern. None was found. Third, the internal slashes on the tent suggest deliberate, measured cutting, not frantic tearing from within a collapsing tent. And lastly, the footprints outside weren't those of panicked people running for their lives. They were methodical, aligned, suggesting urgency, yes, but not blind terror. So if not an avalanche, what else? My shift began at midnight. The night crew consisted only of Jennifer and me. Maria and Tom handled the daytime operations. At night, the complex felt different. Sounds echoed longer, shadows seemed to stretch farther, and a subtle vibration in the floor pulsed constantly, so faint it could be dismissed as imagination. But I was always paying attention. The energy draw from Echo 9 was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It pulled nearly 1 megawatt continuously, yet the consumption pattern defied all known logic. spiking and plummeting without any predictable rhythm. It resembled a heartbeat, if such a thing could be measured in kilowatts. Jennifer was stationed at her console, monitoring a wall of a dozen surveillance feeds, corridors, sealed chambers, utility tunnels, but something about the Echo 9 footage stood out. Unlike the real-time feeds from every other zone, Echo 9 had a 6-second delay. Worse, it appeared to be looping the same segment over and over. "Hey Jen, you seeing this? That feed's stuck." She glanced up. "What feed?" I pointed. "Camera 7, Echo 9. It's repeating." She frowned, tapped at her keyboard. System diagnostics show all feeds are online and normal. But I was watching a loop, a security guard walking past a door, again and again, at the same moment every 6 seconds. Like a broken animation locked in time. By the third night, the temperature around my station began to fluctuate wildly. Though the building's climate system held a steady 68 degrees Fahrenheit, my workspace swung from freezing to stifling in minutes. A check of the HVAC logs showed everything functioning nominally. Then I saw them. Etched symbols carved into the side of one of the main server racks. They hadn't been there the night before. They looked vaguely technological, like circuit diagrams, but not quite. The shapes were organic, flowing, as if someone had tried to merge anatomy and machinery into one incomprehensible design. I was leaning in with a flashlight when I heard Jennifer gasp behind me. "Cal, you need to see this." One of the Echo 9 corridor feeds had changed. The looping footage was gone. Now, it showed a still hallway. At the far end, a door began to open. Slowly. Silently. "That door isn't supposed to open," Jennifer said in a whisper. Through the widening gap, something shifted. It wasn't walking. It moved like light. Viscous, flowing, intelligent. Then the feed cut to static. 30 seconds later, it returned to the same loop of the guard passing the sealed door. But in that brief interruption, I had seen something. Something that shattered my assumptions. In the floor's polished reflection, just before the blackout, an enormous silver eye had stared back at us. Not a camera, not a machine. Something living. And it had seen us too. On Thursday, Tom didn't show up for his shift. Jennifer and I waited until 8 before notifying Director Hayes. The response was curt. "Mr. Brady has been reassigned." No explanation. Yet Tom's belongings were still in the break room. His half-drunk coffee still warm, his jacket hanging over his chair like he'd stepped away momentarily. Maria's behavior shifted that afternoon. She mumbled constantly, double-checking systems that didn't need it. When I asked if she was all right, she looked at me like she didn't know who I was. "The numbers don't make sense," she said. "We're feeding Echo 9 enough power to light a city, but the thermal output doesn't match." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the energy is going elsewhere." "Elsewhere as in—" "Not here, somewhere that isn't here at all." That night, at precisely 2:17 a.m., the emergency alarms erupted. Deafening klaxons rang out, vibrating through bone. Jennifer and I froze. Was this the lockdown Hayes had warned us about? Then, mid-blare, everything stopped. Instantly. Not faded, cut off. Silence followed, a silence so dense it pressed on the skin. 5 minutes later, Director Hayes entered the control room, visibly rattled despite his efforts to appear calm. "False alarm," he muttered. "Resume operations." But he didn't meet our eyes. His hands trembled as he turned away. The following morning, Maria was gone. "Reassigned," Hayes said again. Her car remained in the underground parking structure untouched. Jennifer unraveled after that, She began breaking into systems she wasn't authorized to access, using admin-level credentials she shouldn't have known. "Jen, what are you doing?" "Finding answers," she replied, her fingers dancing over the keys. "Tom gave me his codes before he disappeared. He told me the project wasn't what it seemed." She pulled up internal files marked with clearance levels I'd never even heard of. Umbra Clear was the lowest tier. Above it, Majestic, then Zodiac, and then a sequence of code names and symbols I couldn't decipher. One document caught my attention. Project Kairos, Phase 3. Implementation status. Bioconductive interface exceeds operational expectations. Subject demonstrates high adaptability to containment conditions and has begun actively influencing local EM fields. Recommend escalation of consciousness mapping protocols. Bioconductive interface? Subject? I said aloud. It wasn't a ship, not machinery. It was alive, and we were feeding it. Another file, dated just 3 days earlier. Minor containment breach at 0217 hours. Subject achieved momentary sensory extension beyond Echo 9 parameters. Containment measures successful. Recommend enhanced isolation. Note: 3 personnel reported symptoms consistent with temporal displacement. Temporal displacement. The looping footage. The missing personnel. Jennifer's search intensified. The next discovery shattered everything. A classified memorandum titled Operation Mirror Veil detailed historical data suggesting the origin of the entity was not extraterrestrial, but extra-dimensional. These beings weren't from another planet. They existed outside conventional space-time, interacting with our world as projections or echoes from parallel dimensions. A final warning followed. Prolonged exposure to subject may lead to fragmentation of consciousness, perception drift, or complete removal from baseline temporal reality. Symptoms include seeing simultaneous timelines, memory displacement, and loss of identity continuity. Immediate recalibration is required. That's what happened to Tom and Maria. They weren't reassigned, they were overwritten, broken by contact with the thing inside Echo 9. Jennifer inhaled sharply beside me. "Cal, look at the date on that document." It was dated 6 months into the future. She found more, buried deep in an encrypted archive supposedly inaccessible. The folder referenced Operation Mirror Veil, a precursor to Kairos, originating in the late 1970s. In 1978, seismic surveys at Tonopah detected unusual tremors, mathematical in pattern, not geological. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a void beneath the mountain, over 200 feet down. The anomaly was spatially impossible, larger inside than its external boundary. When researchers drilled into it, they encountered matter that didn't behave normally. Materials that flickered in and out of our reality, vanishing and reappearing unpredictably. At first, it was assumed to be alien, but that changed in 1983, when physicist Dr. Elena Vasquez posited that the entity wasn't foreign. It was a reflection of us. Not humanity as it is, but as it could be, if freed from linear time. The entity possesses memory of events not yet occurred and visions of paths that may never exist, she wrote. It exists in superposition, across timelines, experiencing every potential simultaneously. It is human consciousness, evolved. Her final report, submitted days before she vanished, left a warning etched into my soul. This being is not hostile, but it is incompatible with human cognition. Its presence fractures the mind, revealing all futures at once. We are not observing an alien life form. We are witnessing our own possible evolution. It is trying to communicate, but its language is awareness. It does not mean to harm us. It means to join us. We are not prepared. We may never be. The closing line stopped my breath. They are not invaders. They are echoes of what we already were. Jennifer unearthed Dr. Vasquez's personal logs next. Encrypted entries decades old, yet somehow updating in real time. The encryption standard hadn't existed when the logs were first created. Something was still speaking through the system from inside Echo 9. Day 1. First attempt at direct communication. The entity projected images directly into my visual cortex. I saw myself, but not the self I know. Alternate versions of Elena Vasquez existing in parallel timelines. In one, I never pursued physics. In another, I died as a child. In a third, I had become something that defied all human classification. Day 3. Temporal displacement events are intensifying. I'm now recalling memories of conversations that haven't yet occurred. The entity is teaching me to perceive existence beyond the bounds of linear causality. It's beautiful and terrifying. Day 7. I understand now. They aren't from there, because there is no there. They exist within the spaces between probabilities, what we become when we evolve past the need for a singular, coherent reality. Day 12. The others don't understand. They still believe containment is possible, that we can study, quantify, and control something that exists outside the very concept of control. They're going to get people killed. Day 18. I can see the breach forming. In 3 days, the entity will try to return to its dimensional matrix, but our containment systems will interfere. That interference will create a paradox, one that fractures reality itself. I need to stop them, but it may already be too late. Time is misfiring. I'm experiencing this moment from multiple vantage points simultaneously. The logs ended there. Yet, somehow, they continued to update in real time. A new entry appeared on screen. Day 7351. Still trying to warn them. Elena variants across divergent timelines attempting intervention. Breach remains inevitable. Cal Monroe will survive, but survival is subjective when reality itself becomes negotiable. Jennifer and I stared at the terminal, speechless. Dr. Vasquez had vanished over 4 decades ago, but her voice, her consciousness was still active across timelines, still transmitting. That's when the lights went out. Not dimmed, not flickered. They snapped off all at once, as though the universe had blinked. Emergency systems should have engaged, but they didn't. The facility was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Even the constant hum of the power grid had changed. Lower in tone now. Strange, melodic, as if something was singing from inside the current. Then Jennifer screamed. I fumbled for my flashlight, finding her frozen in place, eyes locked forward, body rigid. Her pupils reflected silver light that didn't exist, her gaze empty and infinite. "Cal," she whispered. But her voice echoed from all around me, distorted, as if spoken across dimensions. "It's getting out." The corridor behind us began to shift. The walls undulated, melting into themselves, reshaping in impossible ways. Something moved within, something with intention, gliding like liquid mercury through the unnatural architecture. I grabbed Jennifer's arm, but my hand passed through her. She was no longer fully here, phasing in and out, oscillating between dimensions like the unstable matter we'd read about in the archives. "Run," she said. Her voice was faint, fading. "It's not trying to hurt us, but we can't exist in the same frame when the barriers break down." The entity emerged from Echo 9, and my brain recoiled at the sight. It wasn't made of light or shadow or form. It was all those things and none. It was probability incarnate. Awareness without the burden of linear time or physical law. Looking at it was like staring into a mirror that showed every version of myself that had ever been, or ever could be. I saw Cal the child, Cal the dying old man, Cal who had never lived, and Cal who had become something no longer human. The guards vanished. Not killed, displaced. They simply moved through walls that no longer had meaning. Their screams echoed from directions that defied spatial logic. I ran, down corridors that folded in on themselves, through rooms that were geometrically impossible. Larger inside than out. The facility was changing, obeying physics I didn't understand. I activated the camera on my military-grade watch, designed for high-interference environments. If I didn't make it, maybe the recording would. I found an elevator, the same one I had used to descend 19 levels, but now it existed in a hallway that hadn't been there moments ago. The panel shimmered and melted, floor numbers flickering between glyphs, digits, and blank space. Still, it was the only way out. The elevator rose in silence, but when the doors opened, I was right back where I started. Same corridor, same fluid walls, same overwhelming sense of being watched by something that saw in more dimensions than I could comprehend. I tried again, same result, and again. The entity wasn't trapping me. It was communicating, but it had no shared language, no common reference. Its presence was generating loops, temporal reflections of my own panic and confusion. I was living this moment through multiple timelines simultaneously. In one, I had never accepted the contract. In another, I was still at my desk, watching readings spike. In yet another, I had become something capable of perceiving the truth without being destroyed by it. But in this version, I was still human, and I was trapped. The watch battery was dying. I kept recording anyway. If anyone ever found the data, they might understand, or at least try. I sat down. The corridor kept shifting, but I no longer ran. I thought about the missing personnel, the looping feeds, the symbols etched in places they shouldn't be. It had all been the entity, trying to bridge the gap, trying to talk. Tom and Maria hadn't been reassigned. They had been restructured, shifted into parallel frequencies where they could coexist with something that didn't understand singular existence. They weren't dead, just inaccessible. Then it returned. The entity flowed through the wall like molten light through a cracked mirror, but this time it didn't overwhelm. It showed me a single image. Dr. Elena Vasquez, not as she had been, but as she was now. Spread across every conceivable reality, trying endlessly to prevent a breach that had both already occurred and not yet begun. She looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. Her voice echoed from past and future. "You're already out, Cal, but you haven't left." Then the corridor folded into itself, and everything disappeared into darkness. Inspector Webb's final report document recovered from the personal effects of Inspector Marcus Webb, Department of Defense Special Investigations Unit, following his apparent suicide in 2025. Clearance level, Umbra Clara, eyes only. Final statement dictated via voice recorder. I've spent 15 years investigating anomalies at black sites, disappearances, unexplained system failures, sealed files with no names. It was all just part of the job. Until Cal Monroe. The official record states Monroe died in an electrical fire at Tonopah on March 18, 2024. No remains. No witnesses. But 3 days ago, a sealed courier dropped an unmarked package on my desk. Inside, a hardened military-grade data drive and a note. Zone Echo 9, debrief, Cal Monroe. I've viewed the content 17 times. I've sent it to analysts who specialize in digital forensics and video fabrication. Every one of them came back with the same answer. The footage is real, undeniably authentic, and utterly impossible. It shows a man, Monroe, running through corridors that behave like living organisms. Walls ripple, space folds, shadows move with no source. It defies every rule of architecture, geometry, and reason. In the final segment, Monroe turns the camera on himself. He's standing inside an elevator that looks normal, until you realize it's bigger on the inside. He speaks directly to the lens. If you're watching this, the loop finally broke. I'm uploading this to the emergency buffer in my boot drive. Maybe someone will find it, maybe someone will understand. He turns the camera, and that's when you see it. A figure. Not human, not machine. A consciousness, embodied. A being made of nothing but thought and light and awareness. But that's not what's haunted me. What keeps me up at night is the reflection. In the polished wall behind Monroe, next to his reflection, is mine. Inspector Marcus Webb, wearing the same clothes I wore that day, staring back through the screen in frozen terror. The timestamp, today's date. I've filed this report. I'm taking leave. Maybe I'll visit my sister. Maybe I won't. Maybe I never did. But Monroe's last message loops in my head. They're not from somewhere else. They're from someone else. And someone else is now. End of dictation. 12 hours later, Webb was found dead in his office. Official cause: suicide by gunshot. However, forensic audio captured two voices at the time of death. The second matched Cal Monroe. The drive has never been recovered. Zone Echo 9 remains active. 3 months later, global space monitoring stations began intercepting a strange signal, broadcasting from no specific origin point. When decoded, it contained a single repeating message. This is Cal Monroe, contractor ID 7749, reporting from Zone Echo 9. The breach has been stabilized, but stability is a temporary concept when dealing with beings beyond causality. Area 52 is not a location, it is a threshold, and thresholds are contagious. If you're reading this, you're already at the edge. Turn back if you can. But if you can't, if you've already heard the hum, seen the echo, felt the loop, then remember this. Love is the only thing that persists across every version of you. Love is the constant. Hold on to it. See you around. Or maybe I already have.